Hello Internet, welcome back to Trumps the Twilight, the channel where I, Vincent, talk to you, the abyss, about books, movies, music I enjoy, find interesting, or a combination of the two. I am going to do the promised videos about disturbing art and disturbing music this week, but before I do that I need to finish my series of videos about the HBO series Euphoria, because I've just watched the final episode and I did promise to give my opinion at the end. I will say that I think that they kind of delivered on the Western thing. So for the first episode, from the first episode onwards, they were setting up several different themes for this season. One of them was Western, a cowboy thing. One of them was about drugs and drug smuggling. Another one was about human trafficking and the abuse of sex workers. And then also about Christianity, God and the devil, good and evil, a kind of battle between these two forces, which is always occurring in the character of Rue, but which was played out in the whole season. And I think actually that in the final episode, they did deliver on this in a way that I kind of wasn't expecting them to. I will say right at the top that I think that the last episode was the best episode of this season. And one of Euphoria's better episodes. I don't think this season as a whole stood up to the other two because they had to make a lot of decisions about the themes and aesthetics after they left high school that kind of turned it into a different show. It reminded me of sequels that are done decades later, like the second Trainspotting movie. It was like you return into these characters, but some of them you didn't recognize and they didn't know how to use all of them. What I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the different plot lines and what I think they were doing with them and how I feel about them. So I think that it's interesting, Sam Levinson, as I've talked about in the previous videos, is criticized a lot as being a misogynist. He may be, I don't know him as a person. I think the work that he makes is a little more complicated than that. It's like he's writing and directing in Euphoria a work that really kind of exaggerates and amplifies and confronts you with the misogyny of American culture. And in Alamo, he created the kind of ultimate misogynistic monster who is in some ways charming and who is able to kind of bend the world around him to his will. And I think that his backstory with his mother, although that was, you could argue that it was a misogynistic story about, it was also just a story about a female con artist who was more focused on her own survival than she was on her son's emotional well-being. And it kind of gives you the information you need about Alamo. He really does not like women. He hates women. There were lots of images around snakes with him, so he was always given the image of the serpent in the garden, the temptation of Christ, the temptation of Eve, and Satan. And then in the end, they set Ali, who is a religious guy, he's been a Muslim, he's been a Christian, they set him up as the representative of good, somebody who is trying to make this world better, almost against all odds, because Euphoria operates within this kind of accelerated capitalist hellscape where Ali's care for other human beings and his attempts to help young people, which come also from a place of his own pain and his destructive past, it's almost fighting a losing battle. So to skip to the end of the season, I think that the final showdown between him and Alamo and the way that they used tropes from westerns in that, with the saloon doors and the kind of what's it, I don't remember what it's called, but like a duel with the guns and everything. I mean, it was tropey, but not in a way that was negative. I think it was kind of interesting. And I feel like Levinson's doing something pretty interesting. It's not 100% ironic. At the end he has this American homestead with the flag flying and God bless us all, and it's like America, the land of the brave, but he's shown you through the whole season the consequences of the American dream. And even Almo, when he is trying to basically extort Maddie into becoming his wife or his brood mare, is talking about the American dream. Rue has been talking about the American dream. The whole season has been the fantasy of the American dream and the nightmare of the American dream. So let's talk about Rue. I pretty much knew Rue was going to die when they did the episode with Ali's other sponsees, the one before the final episode, when they showed you his Book of the Dead, and also when Rue left her Bible behind. Those two things together made me think that the series would end with Ali writing Rue's name in that book. And it's sort of it's slightly annoying how they kind of faked you out loads of times by putting Rue in extreme danger, and then in the end she was killed by fentanyl, which was this theme of the season, fentanyl coming in over the border and being sold to people. But even though it was a little predictable that Rue was going to die, or it was foreshadowed a great deal, Lexi was also going to write a character where her aim was to kill the character. Although it was foreshadowed, it was really smart the way they did it. They did it so early in the last episode that most of the last episode, which was film length, was dealing with the aftermath of her death. And obviously her death was the catalytic event for Ali that turned the last episode into this good versus evil showdown, which is enormously American, but then the series has been about America. I felt like the overdose where she first woke up and Fezco had escaped from prison and she went to pick him up and everything. You probably worked out it was a dream before me. It took me a long time. Even when she climbed in the window of the house, I didn't realize it was a dream. It wasn't until she saw her mother and started reaching out to her that I realized she was overdosing. And then, Ali wakes up and they do it all again. The first time he woke up and lit a cigarette, I thought she was dead. And when she wasn't dead, I was relieved. So then when she was dead again, I was really sad. I found that whole sequence extremely moving. And what adds a layer of emotionality to that sequence is that, Angus Cloud, who played Fezco, is dead. And they had images of him and Zendaya together in a field, and he was supposed to have escaped from prison. So it was like, on the one hand, it was a tribute to him. On the other hand, it was almost like Zendaya's character, Rue, went to meet the actor who played Fezco, wherever he is. And I don't know, I really found it very touching and quite beautiful. On the other hand, I hate everything they did with Jules in the whole of this season. I hate everything they did with Nate in the whole of this season. I think that those two storylines can only be explained by the possibility that neither of those actors had any time and they shot all their stuff in a couple of days. Actually, I heard on a podcast that Jacob Elordi did shoot all his stuff in the space of a couple of days, but I think Hunter Schafer must have done as well. She's almost always in that apartment. She's hardly in any of the episodes. She was barely in the last episode. The end of her story was very unsatisfying. The whole of Nate's story was enormously unsatisfying, but the very end of his story, when he died, I didn't care for the way that he died. I didn't care much actually for that part of that episode up until Cassie and Maddie found him together, because at that point there was something quite moving in it. Like, he has bound them together in this very toxic way always, and both of them have been in love with him despite all of his flaws. So for them to both try to rescue him together and for them to fail together, it sort of transforms their relationship, and it makes me believe that maybe they will remain friends for the rest of their lives. I thought what they did with Cassie through the whole season was pretty great. I've said this in the previous videos, but I continued to like it. I really wanted her to succeed, even though she's a very narcissistic, superficial individual. The scenes when she was kind of conning the actor to get her revenge were really campy and funny. The thing with the finger on ice was like disgusting but morbid, almost like something from a kind of horror comedy. Also before that, when she was dissociating, doing her acting part, and then actually getting the role. It's like, I remember hearing an interview with Pamela Anderson where she talked about, how she just used to get given opportunities all the time. People would just be like, oh, do you want to act? Or do you want to come live in the Playboy Mansion? Like, the world was not the same for her as it was for other people because of the way that she looked and the way that she presented. And I think Cassie is that sort of LA figure. I hated that she got into the situation that she got into because of Nate's death. I don't think the story with Maddie was fully realized through most of the season. Like, they seem to be showing her being corrupted by money, by her need to get out of her situation, and a certain identification maybe with Alamo at first. So when she's like slapping Cassie and basically behaving like a pimp. But then I thought that actually what happened to her in the season was genuinely horrific. Like, in the earlier seasons, I've always really liked Maddie, and what happened to her with Alamo gave the final episode some real stakes. And I like the idea that her kind of charm and her genuineness and the way that Alamo exploiting that is like a last straw for Bishop. I thought that was cool, and both what Bishop did and what happened to Ali are tropes from westerns. Like, I've seen many westerns as a kid. It's not a genre that I watch much as an adult, but I watched them a lot as a kid. And there's often a person who is like a person of principle, who in the final act of a western makes a decision that goes against what have been their principles. And both Bishop and Ali kind of do that. Bishop turns on his boss, and Ali he moves beyond his attempts to improve the world through religion and care. One thing that disappointed me about season 3 was Laurie's character. Laurie, when she was introduced in season 2, was more interesting. She was like a suburban housewife who'd become addicted to Oxycontin and then become a dealer, but there'd always been something off with her. She's some sort of psychopath, or she's neurodivergent in some way, or both. And she was a genuinely menacing, terrifying figure. When they put her in this situation with these like redneck Nazis and all the birds around her, and she was always watching TV, she seemed somehow reduced and she was much less frightening. She wasn't that interesting a foil to Alamo, really. But I don't know, the way Laurie's story played out, it wasn't what I would have envisaged when I saw her in season 2. A couple of final thoughts about this season. I think the aesthetic and the color grading, the soundtrack, the way that they shot things worked best in the last episode, and it was almost as if they used the whole season to work up to this western that they did in the last episode. The shot of Cassie sitting in her empty mansion was very symbolic, but also a real beautiful piece of filmmaking. The landscapes, the yellows, all of it kind of was very striking and made a lot of sense for the content and the concepts. Levinson seemed to be suggesting at one point that he was inspired by David Lynch, or maybe he was tributing David Lynch, who must have died in the course of him kind of working on this season, because at the point when Alamo has kind of worked his way into Cassie and Maddie's lives, they're sitting in a diner looking very disheveled and broken. And in the background, the music from the Roy Orbison song from Blue Velvet is playing. And the diner, you don't see it very much, but it could be the Twin Peaks diner, or there are many diners in David Lynch movies. So I feel like they were sort of, they were referencing Frank Booth and the story in Blue Velvet and this kind of underbelly of America. I didn't think it made total sense because Levinson's the feeling of what he does is so unlike Lynch, but I didn't hate it either. And a final thought is almost as if when this episode comes to an end and this season comes to an end, it's almost like they're saying that the characters, their stories are closed, and the actors are now free. But also it's like the audience is like, they're letting us go. Like, I really felt like the end of it was sort of like, okay, you've been through this nightmare and now you can wake up. So yeah, maybe it wasn't so unlike the other seasons in as much as it was frustrating, it was messy, it was ambitious, it didn't always pull it off, it did some very strange things along the way, but in the end they managed to pull it together, and it did have a strong closing in my opinion. So that's my thoughts on the season. Feel free to as ever jump in the comments and let me know what you thought about it, and I'll be back soon with the videos that I keep promising I'm going to make.